Trading a superstar, at times it seems like the necessary move to move a franchise forward, but it's actually one of the riskiest moves a team could make, because it often backfires and rarely ever works out good for both teams. We're looking at 12 superstar trades that backfired, but we're not looking at any where the star forced a trade and the franchise had no choice but to make a bad deal in return. And we're not looking at any where major injuries made a deal turn out bad. We're only looking at deals where both teams thought they were getting what they wanted in return. So let's take a look back to 2019 and the Paul George and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander trade. And remember that to bring in Paul George, the Clippers traded Shai, Danilo Gallinari, 5 first-round picks, and 2 pick swaps, in what was one of the largest deals ever given up for a single player. The Clippers felt like they had to make this deal because Kawhi Leonard said he would only join the team as a free agent if they were able to bring in PG. So effectively, this deal was able to land them both players, but it was still only made for George. At the time, it looked like a solid move that made LA championship contenders, but now it's 4 years later and the Clippers haven't won or really contended for anything, while the Thunder have still yet to cash in on 3 of the first rounders or any of the 2 pick swaps. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has broken out this year, now averaging 35-5. And it's not even like this should have caught the Clippers by surprise, because they drafted him 11th overall as a 6'6" point guard, and for years he's been mentioned as a guy that's considered one of the top young players to build around in a poll of NBA executives. Plus, they traded him after only his rookie season. Now, the Clippers seasons are up in the air, and the future couldn't be brighter for OKC. Now, the only exception I'll make to one of the rules I mentioned earlier is involving the James Harden trade to the Philadelphia 76ers. Because even though Ben Simmons had one of the biggest holdouts of all time and put himself in a disaster situation where he forced a trade, he was still traded for James Harden, while James also pretty much forced a trade from the Brooklyn Nets anyways. So it kind of evens out and was fair enough trade at the time to justify. Both guys were in bad situations, so James Harden and Paul Millsap were traded for Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, Ben Simmons, and 2 first-round picks. Brooklyn thought they were getting these assets to go along with a 26-year-old all-star playmaker, but instead they've gotten a role player and a guy that doesn't look like he'll ever be an all-star again. And it's tough because let's not forget the Nets had just gotten James Harden 1 year prior and gave up Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, 3 first-round picks, and 4 first-round pick swaps to bring him in. So they basically traded all of this for this, which is a robbery if I've ever seen one. Another former MVP involved in a trade was Russell Westbrook when he was traded for Chris Paul to the Rockets. He was coming off his 3rd straight season averaging a triple-double and only a couple seasons removed from winning a league MVP. Well, finally both teams decided it was time to switch things up. The Thunder tried winning with Russ and PG, but after getting slapped up 4-1 by the Trailblazers in the first round, they knew it was over. And after 3 years of losing with James Harden and Chris Paul, the Rockets knew the same. So the 2 teams swapped point guards. Russell Westbrook for Chris Paul, 2 first-round picks, and 2 first-round pick swaps. And it couldn't have backfired any harder for the Houston Rockets, because they would go on to finish with a worse record and have a worse playoff performance than in any of the years CP3 played with Harden. Trading for Westbrook only made the team worse, and they had to give up basically 4 extra picks to get him. While on the other hand, Chris Paul went to the Thunder and almost had a better year with them than Russ and PG did when they were there. Not even to mention that this was so bad for Houston that they traded Russ for an injured John Wall who hadn't played in 3 years, a first-round pick, and then blew up their entire team after the season. So they basically traded CP3, 2 first-round picks, and 2 pick swaps for John Wall and 1 first. To make matters even worse, a trade involving Russell Westbrook backfired again immediately after when he was traded to the Lakers. LA gave up Isaiah Jackson, KCP, Montrezl Harrell, and Kyle Kuzma to the Wizards for Russell Westbrook and 3 second-round picks. All of this for the guy just traded for a broken John Wall and a first-round pick. But that may not have been a worse trade than the one involving Rudy Gobert. We can all agree that even though they were coming into this season as defending champs, the Minnesota Timberwolves needed to do something, while the Utah Jazz just so happened to be blowing up their team. So they made a swap and Rudy Gobert joined the Wolves in exchange for Malik Beasley, Pat Beverly, Leandro Balmero, Walker Kessler, and 5 first-round picks, making this pretty close to the deal that used to get Paul George. I get it, I see what Minnesota was trying to do here, give themselves the new Twin Towers, add more defense to their team, and change things up, but this wasn't it. And that's been followed up with them being on pace to have a worse record than they did last year. Sure, Towns has been out for most of the season already with an injury, but they were still on that same pace even with him. A trade this massive has to be followed up with a championship or a direct sign that they're headed that way. But speaking of big men, let's switch gears to Shaquille O'Neal. Now, I won't be mentioning when he was traded off the Lakers because that one was obviously forced by him, Kobe, and the team, so it was never going to be a fair deal. But let's look at the one after that, when Shaq went from the Miami Heat to the Phoenix Suns. Now, by this point, Shaq had definitely fallen off from where he once was. By the end of his run in Miami, he had turned into a 2nd or 3rd option type player, but was still able to help Wade win a championship and make the All-Star team every year while now averaging 17 and 7 a game. While on the other hand, the Phoenix Suns were led by, of course, Steve Nash, Amari Stoudemire, and Shawn Marion, playing small ball in the 7-second offense. They were one of the top teams in the West every year and had just won 61 games. games, only losing to the Spurs in the playoffs because of a push. This team looked great, but then they trade Sean Marion and Marcus Banks to the Heat for Shaq, which instantly backfired for both teams. For the Suns, Sean was their go-to defender, guarding everyone from Kobe Bryant to Yao Ming, and their whole system was based on playing small. But now they got the biggest and slowest guy in the league on their team. So in his first full season there, they finished with only 46 wins and missed the playoffs completely. They went from championship contender to sitting at home over the summer. While for the Heat, well, Marion didn't even make it through an entire season before they had to trade him again. So he really didn't spend too long there. And something similar happened to Gary Payton, because he was once traded to the Milwaukee Bucks for Ray Allen. And most people won't even remember that Payton played in Milwaukee because it only lasted about 28 games. You see, with Sean Kemp gone, the Sonics as a team had struggled to even make the playoffs for the past 5 years. But through that, Payton was still in his prime, putting up career numbers and making all-star teams. While on the other hand, Ray Allen was putting up great numbers on the Bucks. Well, when word got out that both players might have been ready to move on to new situations, the two were swapped. It worked out good for Seattle. Ray had 4.5 solid years there. While for the Bucks, Payton helped them to make the playoffs and led the team in points and assists, only to leave after half a season as an unrestricted free agent to join the Lakers for that 2004 team. So they pretty much lost Ray Allen for nothing. You could say that's what happened to the New Orleans Pelicans when they traded for DeMarcus Cousins. Then he tore his Achilles. But we're actually doing this one the other way around. When the Pelicans traded Buddy Hield, Tyreek Evans, Langston Galloway, and a first and second round pick for DeMarcus Cousins, it was actually a great move. It instantly transformed them into a threat. And I think this trade actually backfired on the Kings, because at the time Cousins was the best center in the league. And it wasn't even like he demanded a trade or asked for it to happen. He actually got really upset and felt betrayed when he found out Sacramento traded him away. So they didn't have to do it, but they made this deal. Then they were a bad team for the next 5 years, all the way up until this season. Okay, sure, they were a bad team for the 5 years before this deal too, but all I'm saying is I think they should have handled the situation a little better and got players that were actually gonna make a difference. Something similar could be said for the Blake Griffin deal, because everyone would agree that it was time for the Clippers to trade him when they did. And they got a great deal back, but it was the Pistons who this backfired on when trying to bring in a superstar. The trade was Blake Griffin, Willie Reed, and Bryce Johnson for Avery Bradley, Tobias Harris, Boban, a first and a second round pick. And considering that they were the Pistons, this was a pretty solid amount of talent to give up. But it would be okay if they were getting the 20 and 10 previous All-Star and superstar Blake. And well, they did for one season when he became an All-Star, but then he missed pretty much the next 2 entire years due to knee injuries before they had to just straight up buy out his contract, which sent them directly into a rebuild and meant that they gave up all this talent for basically nothing. And when speaking about superstar trades backfiring, none of them could ever get any worse than it did for the Minnesota Timberwolves when they traded for Jimmy Butler. The Bulls sent Jimmy and Justin Patton to Chicago in exchange for Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn, and Lauri Markkanen, which led to him basically calling out and embarrassing the entire franchise for not trying to win games and for the players not working hard. So he demanded a trade after one season, and the situation got so bad that they were only able to trade him for Jared Bayless, Robert Covington, Dario Saric, and a second round pick. So if you ever wonder why the Wolves are always so bad, don't forget that they basically traded this for this. And that's it. I'm ending the video.